In the small, tight-knit community of Greenville, Ohio, everything appeared peaceful on the surface. Neighbors greeted each other warmly, children rode bikes down cul-de-sacs, and Sunday barbecues were a regular event. Mark and Danielle Hayes were seen as a picture-perfect couple, both in their mid-30s, with steady jobs, no children, and a tidy home. Mark, once a high school history teacher, had moved into freelance tutoring after a fallout at work that no one spoke about. Danielle worked as a dental hygienist, quiet and soft-spoken, often described by friends as sweet but private. About 5 miles across town lived Chris and Leah Dalton. Chris was a mechanic, known for his easygoing nature and infectious laugh. Leah worked part-time at a local boutique and spent the rest of her time managing the couple's social media blog about relationships. They had been together since their early 20s, a couple that seemed to weather life's ups and downs effortlessly. But behind closed doors, things were less than ideal. Leah felt increasingly disconnected, often describing her marriage as good but predictable. The lives of these two couples intersected through an online forum dedicated to alternative lifestyles. It was Leah who first found the forum, browsing out of curiosity one late night after reading a blog post about reigniting passion. She stumbled across a thread discussing consensual partner swapping. At first, it felt wild, laughable even, but as she read stories from other couples, the idea began to grow. She brought it up with Chris, expecting him to shut it down, but instead, he surprised her. They talked about boundaries, trust, and what it could mean for their marriage. Slowly, cautiously, they began to explore. It was Leah who first reached out to Mark and Danielle after seeing their profile in the forum. Their photos looked normal, relatable. A few dinner dates followed, where the conversation felt natural and easy. Mark and Leah shared an interest in literature and long-distance hiking, while Chris and Danielle bonded over their mutual introversion. After a few weeks, the couples agreed to move forward. They set clear rules: no one-on-one meetups without consent, open communication between all four, and a one-time-only trial. It was meant to be an experiment, controlled, safe, and respectful. The night it happened, all four met at a lakeside Airbnb a few towns over. Wine was poured, stories were exchanged, and nervous laughter filled the room. What followed was exactly what they'd agreed to. No surprises, no drama. When it was over, they returned to their normal lives, planning to never speak of it again. But something had changed, especially for Mark. He couldn't stop thinking about Leah. He said nothing to Danielle, who assumed the experiment was behind them. But Mark began replaying moments from that night in his mind: Leah's voice, her perfume, the way she laughed at his jokes. He started logging onto the forum late at night, scanning for her online presence, searching for posts she might have made. It wasn't just physical. Mark believed they had connected in a way that went deeper than the arrangement allowed. What had started as a shared curiosity became, for Mark, the beginning of an emotional fixation. He wasn't ready to let go, and soon, he would make sure he didn't have to. Mark's obsession with Leah grew quietly but steadily. He began withdrawing from his everyday routine, letting go of the structure that once defined his life. He stopped taking on new tutoring clients, letting his freelance business slip. Danielle noticed the shift: his frequent zoning out during conversations, the nights he stayed up late on his laptop, the increasing emotional distance between them. But when she asked if something was wrong, Mark brushed it off. He claimed he was just tired or stressed. Danielle didn't press further. She didn't want to believe that one weekend had stirred something deeper in her husband. Meanwhile, Leah had moved on. She and Chris had agreed the experience was exciting but ultimately not something they wanted to continue. Their relationship, while not perfect, had gained a new layer of trust after the experience. Leah deleted her profile on the forum and began focusing more on their blog, writing posts about intimacy and communication. Her life went on as usual, filled with work, errands, and dinner with Chris. She had no idea that Mark was watching from a distance, carefully noting every online post, every photo, every public appearance. Mark created a fake account and started interacting with Leah's blog under a pseudonym. He left flattering comments and asked open-ended questions, trying to draw her out. Sometimes, he would drive by her boutique, parking across the street and just watching her through the shop windows. It gave him a sense of closeness, even though Leah had no idea he was there. What disturbed Mark the most was how easily she had moved on, as if what they shared meant nothing. He told himself that she was just pretending, that she was ignoring her feelings because of Chris. The tipping point came when Leah posted a photo of her and Chris at a vineyard, smiling with their arms wrapped around each other. Mark stared at the photo for hours, zooming in on Leah's face, her smile, the hand she had rested on Chris's chest. Rage began to grow. He became convinced that Chris was standing in the way of what was supposed to be his life with Leah. That photo, in Mark's mind, wasn't just a happy moment, it was a taunt. He started to believe Leah was sending him a message, daring him to do something, to fight for what they had. Danielle found Mark's behavior increasingly hard to ignore. She discovered the fake profile he had used to comment on Leah's blog, and when she confronted him, Mark denied everything. But his denial was half-hearted. Danielle could see something had changed in him. There was a strange intensity behind his eyes, a sharpness that hadn't been there before. She began sleeping in the guest room, unsure of what her husband was thinking, unsure of what he might do. Leah finally noticed something odd when she received a gift at her boutique, a small box containing a bracelet she had mentioned liking months earlier during a casual conversation with Mark. There was no note, no name, just the item and a ribbon. She was unsettled but still didn't connect it to him. The idea that someone she had known briefly could be stalking her never crossed her mind. She assumed it was an anonymous admirer or someone who followed her blog. It wasn't alarming yet, just strange. But Mark had crossed a line. And once crossed, he had no intention of turning back. The evening Chris Dalton disappeared began like any other. He kissed Leah goodbye before heading to the auto shop where he worked. He had a few routine jobs lined up, and Leah expected him home by 7. When the clock hit 9 and there was still no word, she began calling his phone. It rang endlessly before going to voicemail. She tried again and again, each unanswered call stoking a growing sense of dread in her chest. By midnight, panic set in. Chris never stayed out late without letting her know. He wasn't the kind of man to vanish without a word. Leah reported him missing early the next morning. Police took her seriously. Chris had no history of disappearing, no enemies, no signs of distress leading up to that day. His phone was still off, and none of his friends had heard from him. A day later, authorities found his car abandoned at a gas station 30 miles outside of town. The keys were still in the ignition. The driver's door was wide open. It looked like he'd stopped briefly and stepped away, only to never return. Surveillance footage from the gas station revealed little, blurry images of a shadowy figure near the vehicle and a timestamp that placed it just after 9:30 that night. As detectives began retracing Chris's last known steps, they stumbled upon a link they didn't expect: the brief lifestyle experiment between the Daltons and the Hayeses. When Leah mentioned it during her interview, the room shifted. What had seemed like a straightforward missing persons case suddenly had new angles: jealousy, betrayal, emotional entanglement. Detectives began looking into Mark and Danielle Hayes. Mark was interviewed first. He claimed he was out of town that night, visiting family with Danielle. He sounded calm, even cooperative. He expressed shock at Chris's disappearance and offered to help however he could. When detectives followed up on his alibi, it initially checked out. Danielle confirmed the story, and relatives verified that they had seen both of them earlier that week. Still, something didn't sit right. A week later, a neighbor came forward with footage from a doorbell camera. The recording showed Mark's car parked in his own driveway the night Chris disappeared. He hadn't been out of town after all. The footage became the first real break in the case. Investigators re-interviewed Danielle, who appeared visibly shaken. When confronted with the video, she hesitated, then admitted that Mark had left the house late that night and returned just before sunrise. She didn't know where he'd gone, and when she asked, he told her it was better if she didn't know. With the lie exposed, police obtained a warrant to search the Hayes home. In the basement, tucked under old boxes and firewood, they found Chris's leather wallet. Inside were his driver's license, a few credit cards, and a folded receipt dated the night he disappeared, proof that he had likely been with Mark in his final hours. The case shifted dramatically. Mark was no longer a curious footnote in Chris's story. He was now the primary suspect. What had begun as a harmless, consensual weekend between couples had morphed into something far darker, and no one could yet see just how twisted it would become. 2 weeks after Chris Dalton vanished, the forest gave up its secret. A hiker navigating a remote trail in the dense, leaf-dampened terrain of Shawnee State Forest stumbled across something disturbing. At first, it looked like a pile of discarded clothing, half covered in dirt and rotting leaves. But the closer he got, the clearer it became. It was a human body, partially buried in a shallow grave, with the corner of a black trash bag torn open around the head. Police quickly arrived and cordoned off the area. The body was decomposed but still recognizable. Dental records and a fingerprint confirmed what Leah had feared most. It was Chris. The autopsy later revealed the cause of death: suffocation. A plastic bag had been tied over his head, and his hands had been bound behind his back. There were no signs of a struggle, suggesting he had either been taken by surprise or subdued in some other way before being killed. There were bruises along his jawline and neck, but no defensive wounds. In his jacket pocket, investigators found something deeply unsettling: a printed photograph of Mark and Leah taken at a fall festival just weeks earlier. It had clearly been printed from a phone or a home computer, the edges frayed and ink slightly smudged. Chris's face had been scratched out with deep, angry lines. The message was clear: this murder had been personal. The discovery of Chris's body sent shockwaves through the community. The small town that once felt safe was now the scene of a calculated, emotionally driven killing. The focus on Mark intensified. Detectives revisited every detail: the fake alibi, the hidden wallet, the obsession with Leah. When confronted with the evidence, Mark said little. His silence only deepened the suspicion. Meanwhile, Leah was unraveling. Grief collided with guilt as she came to terms with the truth. Her decision to entertain a harmless fantasy had somehow led to the death of her husband. She began receiving strange, unsigned letters in the mail, handwritten notes that seemed to know too much about her daily life. One simply read, "You don't belong to him anymore." Another said, "Now you're free." She didn't tell the police at first, unsure if it was someone trying to scare her or Mark attempting to reach her from afar. Danielle, too, was struggling. She had been loyal to her husband for years, ignoring red flags and rationalizing his cold moods. But now, as detectives pieced together the timeline, Danielle was forced to admit that she had unknowingly enabled something far worse. Her statements to police became increasingly emotional as she described Mark's behavior in the weeks leading up to Chris's disappearance. His late-night drives, his sudden outbursts, and the night he returned home with mud on his shoes and a blank stare. The arrest came swiftly. Mark Hayes was taken into custody at his home without incident. When officers searched his computer, they found dozens of saved images of Leah, some taken from her blog, others from her personal social media, pictures that had never been made public. There were journal entries, too, describing a fantasy life where he and Leah lived together, free from judgment, free from Chris. But the most disturbing part wasn't just that Mark had killed. It was that he believed he had done it for love. The trial of Mark Hayes drew intense media attention. It wasn't just a crime that captivated the public. It was the bizarre and tragic unraveling of two seemingly ordinary couples caught in a twisted web of fantasy, obsession, and death. In the courtroom, Mark sat expressionless, his eyes fixed forward as the prosecution laid out the sequence of events leading to Chris Dalton's murder. They painted Mark as a man who had lost touch with reality, someone who became so fixated on another man's wife that he believed eliminating her husband was a justified act of love. Danielle Hayes was one of the prosecution's most crucial witnesses. Her testimony painted a picture of a man descending into a dangerous mindset. She described how Mark had become distant, emotionally volatile, and secretive in the weeks following the wife swap. She told the court about the night Mark left the house, the lies he told her, and the evidence she discovered afterward that pointed to his involvement. Her voice trembled as she admitted she no longer recognized the man she had married. Leah Dalton's appearance in court was perhaps the most emotionally charged. Dressed in black and visibly shaken, she recounted her brief involvement with Mark and how she had attempted to cut ties after realizing his feelings were intensifying. She described the anonymous gifts, the cryptic letters, and the lingering sense of being watched. The courtroom fell silent as she broke down, apologizing publicly to her late husband, as if her own choices had somehow invited the darkness that followed. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before returning with a verdict: guilty of first-degree murder. Mark Hayes was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge called his actions premeditated, selfish, and beyond comprehension, a cold-blooded killing disguised as romantic desperation. Justice, it seemed, had been served. But the story was not yet over. Months after the trial ended, a tip came into the Greenville Police Department. A former co-worker of Leah's claimed that, a few weeks before Chris's disappearance, Leah had made odd remarks about her marriage. According to the tipster, Leah had joked that her husband might not be around much longer, and was later seen using a burner phone during work hours. At first, the claims seemed speculative. But as detectives looked deeper, they found inconsistencies in Leah's online activity. Deleted messages were recovered from Mark's email, including several from a mystery number that had sent taunting texts, messages designed to look like they came from Chris. What emerged was a chilling possibility. Leah may have manipulated Mark by pretending to be Chris, provoking his jealousy and fueling his obsession until he finally snapped. Investigators couldn't prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. The burner phone was never recovered, and Leah denied everything. But the theory lingered, casting a shadow over the narrative everyone thought they understood. In the end, Mark went to prison for a murder he undeniably committed. But whether he acted entirely on his own, or was subtly pushed by the woman he thought he loved, remained a haunting mystery. In Greenville, the case was closed. But for those who lived through it, the truth would never be simple.